The acrid smoke of burnt gunpowder still hung in the morning air when Fiona Ellis signed away her freedom in exchange for financial security at the Silverdale County Courthouse. Her trembling hand betrayed the war within her heart, but the desperation of 3 years as a penniless widow had finally won. Her new husband, Harold Montgomery, stood imperiously beside her, his salt and pepper mustache twitching with satisfaction as she completed her signature. Montana Territory, 1876. A land of promise and peril where fortunes were made and lost with the changing of the seasons. For Fiona, 26 years old with fiery copper hair that matched her spirit, the untamed landscape had once represented freedom after escaping Boston's suffocating society. Now it represented another cage, albeit one lined with silken comforts. "The papers are in order, Mrs. Montgomery," the clerk announced, stamping the marriage certificate with an air of finality. Harold's hand rested possessively on Fiona's lower back as they exited the courthouse. "I've arranged for our things to be packed and moved to my estate by nightfall. We leave within the hour." "So soon?" Fiona asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The small room she'd rented above the millinery shop had been humble but hers. Now even that small piece of independence would be gone. "No sense delaying. Silver Creek Ranch needs its mistress." His tone left no room for argument. Fiona forced a smile, reminding herself of the practicality of her decision. Harold Montgomery was the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties. His sprawling estate boasted over 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, a magnificent 2-story home, and enough servants to run a small hotel. Most importantly, he had offered to settle her late husband's considerable debts that had threatened to send her to debtor's prison. What did it matter that at 52 he was exactly twice her age? What did it matter that his first 2 wives had died under circumstances the townsfolk still whispered about? She would have security. Her stomach would be full. The creditors would disappear. These thoughts sustained Fiona as Harold's carriage wound through the rolling foothills toward Silver Creek Ranch. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, and dust from the road coated her traveling dress. In the distance, the jagged peaks of the mountains cut a magnificent silhouette against the azure sky. "You'll want for nothing," Harold declared, breaking the silence. "The finest dresses from back east, jewelry, whatever your heart desires." Fiona nodded politely. "You're very generous." "And you, my dear, are very beautiful." His eyes traveled over her form in a way that made her skin crawl. "A fitting ornament for a man of my stature." An ornament. That's all she was to him. Something pretty to display to his business associates to parade around at social gatherings. The realization wasn't shocking. She'd known what this marriage was from the moment he'd proposed, but hearing it stated so plainly still stung. The carriage crested a hill, and Silver Creek Ranch spread out before them in all its grandeur. White fences enclosed verdant pastures where prized horses grazed. The main house stood proudly at the center, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the sun. Nearby stood a bunkhouse, stables, and various outbuildings that comprised the working heart of the ranch. As they approached, ranch hands stopped their work to remove their hats respectfully. Harold acknowledged them with curt nods, clearly enjoying the display of deference. "Your new home, Mrs. Montgomery," he announced as the carriage pulled up to the front entrance. A ranch hand approached to help with the horses, a tall figure whose face was shadowed by a well-worn Stetson. He moved with the easy grace of a man who spent most of his life in the saddle. "Boss," the man greeted, his voice a deep rumble as he took the reins. When he looked up, Fiona found herself staring into the most striking pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Ah, Forrester," Harold acknowledged. "Meet my new wife, Fiona. This is Preston Forrester, my foreman." The cowboy tipped his hat. "Madam." His gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than propriety dictated, something akin to sympathy flickering in those azure depths. "Mr. Forrester," she replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Get the luggage inside," Harold ordered, helping Fiona down from the carriage. "And tell Mrs. Hawkins to prepare refreshments in the parlor." "Yes, sir." Preston Forrester's expression remained neutral, but something in the set of his jaw suggested he didn't appreciate Harold's commanding tone. Inside, the ranch house was as opulent as Fiona had imagined. Persian rugs adorned hardwood floors, oil paintings in gilt frames hung on every wall, and velvet drapes framed the tall windows. Harold led her on a tour, pointing out his various acquisitions with the pride of a man who measured his worth by his possessions. "The previous Mrs. Montgomery's belongings have been removed," he informed her as they entered the master bedroom. "You'll find the wardrobe stocked with new garments I had commissioned from Denver. I guessed at your measurements." Fiona ran her fingers over the silk and satin gowns that hung in the armoire. They were beautiful, certainly, but somehow knowing they had been selected without her input made them feel like another form of ownership rather than a gift. "Thank you," she murmured, the words like ashes in her mouth. "I have business to attend to in my study. Feel free to explore the house. Dinner is served promptly at 6. With that, Harold left her alone in what was now supposedly her room. Fiona sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing her carefully maintained composure to crack. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't change her situation. She had made her choice, traded her freedom for financial security. Now she would have to live with it. A soft knock at the door startled her. Quickly composing herself, Fiona called, "Enter." A middle-aged woman with a kind face and graying brown hair stepped into the room. "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm Mrs. Hawkins, the housekeeper. I've brought some tea." "Thank you, Mrs. Hawkins." Fiona accepted the cup gratefully. The housekeeper hesitated, then said in a lowered voice, "If you need anything at all, you just let me know." Something in the woman's tone gave Fiona pause. "I appreciate that." After Mrs. Hawkins departed, Fiona moved to the window. From here, she could see most of the ranch's central operations. Cowboys moved cattle between pastures. Stable hands led horses to and from the paddocks. And there, supervising it all, was Preston Forrester, his tall frame unmistakable even at a distance. As if sensing her gaze, he suddenly looked up toward her window. Even from afar, the intensity of those blue eyes seemed to pierce right through her. Fiona stepped back quickly, her heart inexplicably racing. This was her life now. Mrs. Harold Montgomery, mistress of Silver Creek Ranch. She would adapt, she would survive. She had to. The following days fell into a predictable pattern. Harold rose early to conduct ranch business, leaving Fiona to her own devices until dinner, when he expected her to be dressed impeccably and ready to listen to his monologues about cattle prices and land acquisitions. At night, he claimed his husbandly rights with mechanical efficiency before retiring to his adjacent dressing room to sleep. After a week, Fiona felt she might suffocate from the monotony and isolation. She had exchanged one prison for another, a gilded one to be sure, but a prison nonetheless. One morning, unable to bear another day confined within the house's suffocating walls, Fiona donned her simplest dress and slipped outside. The early summer air was fresh with the scent of wildflowers and grass, and she drew it deeply into her lungs. Her feet carried her toward the stables, where the sounds and smells of horses provided a comforting familiarity. As a girl in Boston, before her family's financial downfall, she had loved riding more than anything. "Mrs. Montgomery," a voice called, startling her. "Can I help you with something?" Preston Forrester emerged from the stable, wiping his hands on a cloth. Without his hat, his sandy brown hair caught the sunlight, and those remarkable blue eyes studied her with curiosity. I was hoping to see the horses," she admitted. "It's been years since I've ridden." Something like approval flashed across his face. "They're fine animals. Would you like to meet them?" "Yes, please." He led her into the cool dimness of the stable, introducing her to each horse by name, explaining their lineage and temperament with obvious pride. "This is Starlight," Preston said, stopping before a stall housing a dappled gray mare. "Gentlest soul on the ranch, perfect for a lady who hasn't ridden in a while." The mare nuzzled Fiona's outstretched hand, her velvet muzzle tickling her palm. "She's beautiful. Would you like to ride her?" Preston asked, then quickly added, "With your husband's permission, of course." Fiona's smile faltered. Mr. Montgomery hasn't expressly forbidden it, but I don't think he would approve. Preston's expression hardened momentarily. Begging your pardon, madam, but there's not much life in being kept like one of those fancy porcelain figurines in the parlor. His boldness shocked her. Mr. Forrester, that's rather presumptuous. It is, he acknowledged without apology, but I've worked for your husband for 5 years now. I've seen how he treats his possessions. The word hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. I am not a possession, Fiona said, even as a voice in the back of her mind whispered, aren't you? Isn't that exactly what you agreed to become? Preston's gaze softened. No, madam, you certainly are not, which is why I thought you might enjoy feeling the wind in your hair again. The invitation was tempting, so tempting that Fiona knew she should refuse. Yet something in his steady gaze, something that recognized her as a person rather than an ornament, made her nod. Perhaps just a short ride. Preston's smile transformed his weather-beaten face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. I'll have Starlight saddled for you tomorrow morning. 7 o'clock, if that suits. Mr. Montgomery always meets with his cattle buyers then. He won't miss you. Fiona knew she should be offended at his presumption, yet she couldn't deny the accuracy of his statement. Harold would indeed be occupied with business matters and likely wouldn't notice her absence. 7 o'clock, she agreed. That night, as she endured another of Harold's cold, dutiful attentions, Fiona closed her eyes and thought of freedom, of galloping across open fields with the wind tousling her hair. The fantasy sustained her through the indignity, as it had each night before. The next morning, Fiona woke before dawn, anticipation fluttering in her stomach like a caged bird. She dressed in her plainest day dress, wishing she had proper riding clothes but knowing Harold would never approve such unladylike attire. True to his word, Preston was waiting at the stables at 7 sharp, Starlight already saddled beside him. Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery, he greeted, his eyes warming at the sight of her. Please call me Fiona when we're away from the house, she requested impulsively. Mrs. Montgomery makes me feel like someone else entirely. Something unreadable flickered in his expression. As you wish, Fiona. The way he said her name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. With practiced ease, Preston helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The contact, brief as it was, left a lingering warmth that confused her. It's been so long, she admitted, adjusting her seat in the side saddle. I may be rather rusty. You'll remember, he assured her, mounting his own horse, a magnificent black stallion. Some things become part of you, like breathing. They set off at a gentle walk, Preston leading them away from the main house toward the eastern pastures. Fiona's initial nervousness soon gave way to remembered joy as her body recalled the rhythm of horseback riding. May we go faster? She asked eagerly after they'd put sufficient distance between themselves and the ranch buildings. Preston grinned. Hold on tight. With a gentle nudge of her heels, Starlight broke into a trot, then a canter. Fiona's heart soared with each hoofbeat. Despite the constraints of her dress and the side saddle, she felt more alive than she had in years. They rode to a hilltop overlooking a meadow bursting with wildflowers. In the distance, a herd of cattle grazed peacefully, white puffs of breath visible in the crisp morning air. It's beautiful, Fiona breathed, dismounting with Preston's assistance. This is my favorite spot on the ranch, he confessed, retrieving a canteen from his saddlebag. When things get difficult, I come here to remind myself what I'm working for. Fiona accepted a drink of water, curious. And what are you working for, Mr. Forrester? Preston, he corrected with a smile. And I'm saving to buy my own spread someday, something small but mine, where no man calls me boy or treats me like I'm less than human. The passion in his voice stirred something in Fiona, a longing she'd buried deep within herself. That sounds wonderful. What about you? He asked, settling beside her on a sun-warmed rock. What dreams keep you going? No one had asked about her dreams in so long that the question caught her off guard. I suppose I stopped dreaming a while ago, she admitted. When my first husband died, leaving nothing but debts, survival became my only goal. Preston studied her face intently. And that's why you married Montgomery. For survival? Fiona looked away, ashamed. For money, she whispered. I married for money because I was afraid of starving, of ending up in debtor's prison, of disappearing without anyone noticing or caring. She expected judgment but found none when she met his gaze again. There's no shame in wanting to survive, Fiona, Preston said gently, but survival isn't living, and money isn't richness. What do you mean? Richness is this, he gestured to the panoramic view before them. It's feeling the sun on your face and the wind in your hair. It's laughing until your sides hurt. It's having someone look at you and truly see you. His words resonated in her soul, awakening long, dormant yearnings. I've forgotten what that feels like, she confessed. Then let me teach you, Preston said, his voice low and earnest. Let me teach you what true richness is. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Fiona knew she should refuse, should return to the house and the bargain she'd made. But something in Preston's eyes, something honest and genuine, made her nod instead. I'd like that. For the next week, Fiona met Preston each morning while Harold was occupied with business. Each day they rode farther from the ranch, exploring hidden valleys and crystal streams. Preston showed her how to track deer, how to identify edible berries, how to gauge the weather from the shapes of clouds. More importantly, he listened, truly listened, when she spoke of her childhood in Boston, her dreams of becoming an artist before financial necessity had intervened, her brief, happy years with her first husband before consumption claimed him. In return, he shared stories of growing up as an orphan on the frontier, apprenticing to a horse trainer at 12, working his way up from stable boy to foreman through sheer determination and skill with animals. You should have your own ranch, Fiona told him one afternoon as they rested beside a bubbling creek. You understand this land better than anyone. Someday, he promised. I've been saving every penny. Another year or two and I might have enough for a small stake. Harold pays you well then. She couldn't help asking. A shadow crossed Preston's face. Not particularly, but a man with nothing learns to live on less. Something about his tone made Fiona suspect there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she found herself confessing, I feel like I'm living two separate lives. When I'm with you, everything seems possible. When I return to the house, to Harold, I can barely breathe. Preston's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. You deserve better, Fiona. I made my choice, she reminded him, though she didn't withdraw her hand. Choices can be unmade, he said softly. The implications of his words frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. Reluctantly, Fiona pulled her hand away. We should head back. Harold will be expecting me for luncheon. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in thoughts they dared not voice aloud. That evening, Harold announced over dinner, we'll be hosting a party next weekend. All the important families in the county will attend. I want to introduce my new wife to society. Fiona nodded dutifully, though the prospect filled her with dread. Of course, I'll speak with Mrs. Hawkins about the arrangements. I've already done so, Harold said dismissively. You need only concern yourself with looking beautiful. The blue silk from Denver should suffice. And wear the sapphire necklace I gave you, as you wish. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. Harold studied her over the rim of his wine glass. You've been rather absent lately, my dear. Mrs. Hawkins tells me you've been riding each morning. Fiona's heart stuttered. Yes. I've always loved horses. I hope you don't mind. Mind? Why would I mind my wife engaging in a healthy activity? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Though I do wonder why Forrester felt it necessary to accompany you personally rather than assigning one of the stable boys. Mr. Forrester has been kind enough to reacquaint me with riding after so many years, Fiona explained, struggling to keep her voice even, and to show me the boundaries of the ranch. Indeed. Harold set down his glass with deliberate precision, while I appreciate his thoroughness. Perhaps it's time you found other diversions. The garden requires attention, and I believe several ladies in town would welcome your participation in their sewing circle. It wasn't a suggestion. Fiona recognized the steel beneath his pleasant tone. Of course, she agreed, hating herself for the capitulation. I've neglected my other duties as mistress of the house. Harold nodded, satisfied. Excellent. I've instructed Forrester to focus on the southern pastures for the next few weeks. They're quite distant. He'll likely camp there with the other hands. The message was unmistakable. Her morning rides with Preston were over. That night, Fiona lay awake long after Harold had retired to his dressing room, her mind racing. In just over a week, Preston Forrester had awakened something she'd thought dead hope, the possibility of joy. The idea that her life could be more than mere survival. Now Harold had effectively separated them. She should be relieved. Whatever dangerous feelings had been developing between her and the ranch foreman could now be safely smothered before they threatened her security. Yet instead of relief, all she felt was a profound sense of loss. The day of Harold's grand party arrived with perfect weather-clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of late summer roses through the open windows. The house had been transformed under Mrs. Hawkins's efficient direction. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, crystal glasses sparkled in the afternoon light, and the dining table groaned under the weight of elaborate dishes prepared by the cook. Fiona stood before her mirror, mechanically fastening Harold's sapphire necklace around her throat. The blue silk gown was indeed beautiful, the color making her green eyes appear more vivid and highlighting the copper tones in her hair. Yet she felt like a doll being dressed for display. A knock at her door preceded Mrs. Hawkins's entrance. "The first guests are arriving, Mrs. Montgomery." "Thank you, I'll be down directly." The housekeeper hesitated, then approached to adjust Fiona's necklace. In a low voice she murmured, "He's back, madam. Mr. Forrester came in just an hour ago." Fiona's heart leapt traitorously. "Why are you telling me this, Mrs. Hawkins?" The older woman's eyes held understanding beyond her station. "Because I've worked in this house for 15 years, through 2 Mrs. Montgomerys before you. I know what happens to birds in gilded cages, madam." Before Fiona could respond, the housekeeper withdrew, leaving her with a tumult of emotions she had no time to process. Downstairs, Harold was already greeting the county's elite ranchers, bankers, merchants, and their wives, all eager to curry favor with the wealthiest man in the territory. He beckoned Fiona to his side, presenting her with proprietary pride. "My wife," he announced repeatedly, his hand at the small of her back like a brand of ownership. Fiona smiled and nodded, playing her role with practiced grace while scanning the room surreptitiously. Would Preston be among the ranch hands serving drinks and hors d'oeuvres, or would he remain safely distant, tending to the horses and cattle? Her question was answered when Harold suddenly stiffened beside her. "Forrester," he called sharply. "I didn't expect you back from the southern pastures so soon." Preston approached, looking distinctly uncomfortable in clean clothes that nonetheless marked him as a working man among the finery. His blue eyes found Fiona's briefly before addressing his employer. "The fence repairs went faster than anticipated, sir. I left Johnson in charge and returned to deliver the report on the cattle count." "It could have waited until Monday," Harold said coldly. Preston's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "You were quite clear about wanting an accurate count before the end of the month, sir." The tension between the two men was palpable. Fiona intervened smoothly. "How thoughtful of you to be so conscientious, Mr. Forrester. Perhaps you could see that the gentlemen's drinks are refreshed." Preston nodded, understanding her attempt to defuse the situation. "Of course, Mrs. Montgomery." As he moved away, Harold muttered, "Presumptuous. I should replace him." "But you said yourself he's the best foreman you've ever had," Fiona reminded him, alarmed at the possibility. Harold's gaze sharpened. "Did I? I don't recall discussing my employees with you, my dear." "Mrs. Hawkins mentioned it," Fiona lied quickly. "Did she? I'll have to remind her that gossiping about ranch business is inappropriate." Fiona regretted her impulsive words immediately. "Please don't." "I'm sure she meant no harm." Harold patted her hand condescendingly. "You're too soft-hearted, my dear. Now the banker's wife is signaling for your attention. Go be charming." The evening crawled by with excruciating slowness. Fiona performed her duties as hostess flawlessly, all while acutely aware of Preston's presence as he moved among the guests. Occasionally, their eyes would meet across the room, and in those brief moments, she felt more truly seen than in all the hours of superficial conversation with Harold's associates. After dinner, the party moved to the parlor for brandies and cigars. The men gathered near the fireplace to discuss business while the women clustered on sofas to exchange gossip. Fiona excused herself on the pretext of checking with the kitchen staff. In the relative quiet of the hallway, she paused to gather herself, exhausted by the effort of maintaining her facade. A door to the side veranda stood ajar, and the promise of fresh air beckoned irresistibly. Stepping outside, Fiona drew a deep breath of the cool night air, savoring the momentary solitude. The stars hung like diamond dust against the velvet sky, and the distant chorus of crickets provided a peaceful counterpoint to the murmur of voices from inside. "You look like you belong among them," a familiar voice said softly from the shadows. Fiona started, then relaxed as Preston stepped into the pool of light spilling from the windows. The stars? Yes, beautiful, distant, untouchable. His words, spoken with quiet reverence, made her heart flutter. "I'm hardly untouchable, Mr. Forrester, just a woman who made a practical decision." "Preston," he corrected gently, "and there's nothing practical about denying your heart." Fiona turned to face him fully, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "We shouldn't be speaking like this." "Probably not," he agreed, making no move to increase the distance between them. "But I've spent 2 weeks thinking of little else besides you, Fiona. 2 weeks wondering if you were happy, if you were smiling, if you missed our rides as much as I did." "Preston," she whispered, his name both a plea and a warning. "I can't or won't," he challenged, his gaze intense in the moonlight. "There's a difference." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps from inside made them both stiffen. Preston stepped back into the shadows just as Harold appeared in the doorway. "There you are, my dear," he said, his tone pleasant but his eyes sharp with suspicion. "Our guests are preparing to leave." "I needed some air," Fiona explained, moving toward him. "The cigar smoke was giving me a headache." Harold's gaze swept the veranda, lingering on the darker corners. "You shouldn't wander alone. These frontier types can be unpredictable, even on my property." He took her arm possessively, guiding her back inside. Fiona resisted the urge to look back, knowing Preston was watching. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of farewells and insincere promises to visit soon. By the time the last guest departed, Fiona was exhausted, her cheeks aching from forced smiles. "You performed admirably," Harold told her as they ascended the stairs to their respective rooms. "Everyone was quite impressed with my choice of wife." "I'm glad," Fiona murmured, wishing only to be alone. Harold paused at her bedroom door. "One matter requires addressing, however." Her stomach tightened with apprehension. "Oh, I saw you on the veranda with Forrester." The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Fiona forced herself to maintain eye contact, though her pulse raced with alarm. "Mr. Forrester was checking the perimeter security, as you've instructed him to do during gatherings," she lied smoothly. "We exchanged pleasantries, nothing more." Harold studied her face, searching for deception. "My previous wives also found him charming," he said coldly. "It didn't end well for them. The threat, for it was surely that, chilled Fiona to her core. "I don't know what you're implying, but don't play the innocent with me," Harold interrupted, his facade of gentility slipping. "I've seen how you look at him, how he looks at you. It stops now or there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" Fiona asked, her fear giving way to a spark of defiance. Harold smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Merely reminding you of our arrangement, my dear. You married me for my money and position. In exchange, I expect loyalty and obedience. Simple business." He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear as he added, "And understand this: what's mine stays mine, by whatever means necessary." With that, he brushed his lips against her cheek in a parody of affection and continued to his own room, leaving Fiona trembling in the hallway. That night, sleep eluded her. Harold's words echoed in her mind, along with the implication about his previous wives. Rumors had circulated about their deaths, one from a fall down the stairs, the other from a riding accident, but Fiona had dismissed them as small-town gossip. Now, she wasn't so sure. The following day, Harold announced at breakfast, "I've decided to let Forrester go." Fiona nearly dropped her teacup. "What? Why?" "I've been dissatisfied with his work for some time," Harold replied, buttering his toast with methodical precision. The incident with the fencing was the final straw. But you said yourself the repairs were completed ahead of schedule, Fiona protested before she could stop herself. Harold's gaze hardened. Are you questioning my business decisions, wife? The word wife sounded like a slur on his lips. Fiona lowered her eyes submissively. Of course not. I just thought. He seemed competent. I've already made arrangements. He'll be gone by noon. Panic fluttered in Fiona's chest. The thought of Preston leaving, of never seeing him again, was unbearable. Yet what could she do? She had married Harold for his money, had willingly entered this gilded prison. She had no right to complain about the terms of her confinement now. After breakfast, Fiona retreated to the garden, ostensibly to supervise the gardener but really to gather her tumultuous thoughts. The morning sun bathed the roses in golden light, their beauty a stark contrast to the darkness gathering in her heart. Mrs. Montgomery. She turned to find Preston standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand. The sight of him made her heart ache with emotions she dared not name. Mr. Forrester, she acknowledged, glancing around to ensure they weren't observed. I heard the news. I'm so sorry. Don't be, he said, a strange intensity in his gaze. It's for the best. How can you say that? Where will you go? A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. I've been saving for years, remember? I have enough to make a start on a small place north of here. It won't be much, but it'll be mine. I'm glad for you, Fiona said, though the words felt hollow in the face of her own desolation. Preston stepped closer, lowering his voice. Come with me. The simple invitation stole her breath. What? Come with me, Fiona, he repeated, urgency threading through his tone. Whatever you think you owe Montgomery, it's not worth your soul, not worth your happiness. I can't just leave, she protested, though a part of her thrilled at the idea. There would be consequences. Harold isn't a man to cross lightly. Preston's expression darkened. I know exactly what kind of man he is. That's why I'm asking you to leave. His previous wives, what about them? Fiona interrupted, needing to hear confirmation of her growing suspicions. They didn't die accidentally, Preston said grimly. Martha caught him embezzling from her family's bank. She threatened to expose him, then mysteriously fell down those stairs. Elizabeth discovered letters proving he'd orchestrated the ruin of her father's business so he could buy it cheaply. Her horse was deliberately spooked during a ride. Horror washed over Fiona as the pieces fell into place. How do you know this? I've worked here through both marriages. I saw the patterns. I tried to warn Elizabeth, but she didn't believe me until it was too late. Regret shadowed his features. I won't make the same mistake with you. Are you suggesting Harold might harm me? I'm saying a man who views his wives as property has no qualms about disposing of them when they become inconvenient. Preston took her hands in his grip warm and sure. I can protect you, Fiona. We can build something real together, something based on mutual respect rather than ownership. The offer was tempting, so tempting that tears sprang to Fiona's eyes. I married for money, Preston. What kind of woman does that make me? A survivor, he answered without hesitation. But you don't have to just survive anymore, you can live really live. A sound from the house made them both start. Preston released her hands reluctantly. I leave at noon. If you want to come with me, meet me at the creek where we stopped that first day. If not, his voice faltered. If not, I understand, but please be careful. He turned to go, then paused, looking back at her with an emotion so raw it made her breath catch. For what it's worth, Fiona Ellis, I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you walked into the stable looking for freedom. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her amid the roses with a decision that would change the course of her life. The hours ticked by with excruciating slowness. Fiona moved through her morning duties mechanically, her mind racing through options and consequences. Could she really leave? Did she have the courage to abandon security for uncertainty? To choose love over safety, and was it truly love she felt for Preston Forrester? Or merely the intoxicating feeling of being valued for herself rather than as an ornament? At 11:30, Harold summoned her to his study. He sat behind his massive oak desk, signing documents with irritable efficiency. I'll be traveling to Denver tomorrow, he announced without preamble. The cattle broker requires personal assurances about our fall delivery. I'll be gone approximately 2 weeks. Fiona nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "I'll have Mrs. Hawkins prepare your things. See that she packs the blue suit. The governor may be in town and I want to make a good impression." He glanced up, his gaze calculating. "I trust you'll manage the household appropriately in my absence, of course." Harold set down his pen deliberately. "Forrester has been dismissed. Johnson will assume his duties temporarily until I find a suitable replacement." "I see. I expect absolute loyalty during my absence, Fiona." The threat beneath his words was unmistakable. "Remember our arrangement." "I haven't forgotten," she assured him, wondering if he could read the deception in her eyes. He seemed satisfied, turning his attention back to his papers. "That will be all." Fiona left the study on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her. In his arrogance, Harold had given her the perfect opportunity, 2 weeks head start before he would even realize she was gone. But could she do it? Could she walk away from everything she'd thought she wanted? In her room, Fiona opened her jewelry box filled with Harold's expensive gifts and removed only the simple gold locket that had belonged to her mother. Her few personal possessions could fit in a single carpet bag. Everything else belonged to Harold, purchased with his money to adorn his wife. At 11:45, Fiona stood before the mirror in her plainest traveling dress, the carpet bag packed and hidden under her bed. The woman who stared back at her looked different somehow, her green eyes brighter, her expression more determined than she'd seen it in years. Mrs. Montgomery. Mrs. Hawkins's voice called from the hallway. "Are you decent? I have fresh towels." "Come in," Fiona called, quickly moving away from the mirror. The housekeeper entered, arms full of linens. Her shrewd eyes took in Fiona's traveling attire immediately. "Going somewhere, madam." Fiona hesitated, then decided on truth. "Yes, and I'm not coming back." To her surprise, Mrs. Hawkins merely nodded. "About time. You're not going to try to stop me." The older woman set down the towels and approached Fiona with unexpected gentleness. "I've buried 2 mistresses in this house, Mrs. Montgomery. I won't see a third." Relief and gratitude washed over Fiona. "Thank you. Mr. Forrester is a good man," Mrs. Hawkins continued. "He'll treat you right." Fiona blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "I have eyes, child." The housekeeper smiled sadly. "Now go before someone else notices. I'll say you have a migraine and aren't to be disturbed." Impulsively, Fiona hugged the startled woman. "I don't know how to thank you." "Live well," Mrs. Hawkins replied simply. "That's thanks enough." With the housekeeper's blessing, Fiona retrieved her carpet bag and slipped down the back stairs and out through the kitchen garden. The path to the creek lay across open pastureland. She would be visible to anyone watching from the house. But with Harold in his study and most of the ranch hands occupied with midday chores, she hoped to go unnoticed. The sun beat down mercilessly as Fiona hurried across the field, her carpet bag growing heavier with each step. Sweat trickled down her back, and her heart pounded with exertion and fear. What if Preston wasn't there? What if this was all an elaborate trick? What if she was making the biggest mistake of her life? The doubts plagued her until she crested the final hill and saw the creek glittering in the noonday sun, and beside it, 2 horses and the tall figure of Preston Forrester. He spotted her immediately, his face breaking into a smile that chased away every lingering doubt in Fiona's heart. This was no mistake. This was her chance at real happiness. Preston strode to meet her, taking the carpet bag from her trembling hands. "You came." "I came," she confirmed, suddenly shy despite the momentous decision she'd just made. He studied her face, his blue eyes serious. "Are you sure, Fiona? Once we leave, there's no going back. Montgomery isn't a man to forgive what he'll see as theft." "Theft," she repeated, confused. "You," Preston clarified. "In his mind, you belong to him, paid for and owned like his cattle or his land." Anger flared in Fiona's chest at the truth of his words. "I don't belong to anyone but myself. I made a mistake marrying for money, but I won't compound it by staying in a loveless, potentially dangerous marriage." Preston's expression softened. "Then let's go. I have a small cabin about a day's ride north. It's not much, but is it yours?" Fiona interrupted. "Yes." "Then it's everything." His smile in response was like the sun breaking through clouds. With practiced ease, Preston helped Fiona mount Starlight, who nickered in greeting. "She missed you these past weeks." he told her, adjusting the stirrups. I missed her too, Fiona admitted, stroking the mare's neck. And her companion. Preston's hand lingered on hers, their eyes meeting in silent communication of feelings too new and precious for words. They rode north at a steady pace, keeping to less traveled trails where possible. Preston explained his plan as they traveled. His cabin lay near a small stream with good water and fertile soil for farming. The nearest town was a half-day's ride away, small but growing. We'll need to be careful at first, he warned. Montgomery has connections throughout the territory. He'll look for you. For how long? Preston's expression darkened. Until he finds someone else to control, or until he convinces himself you're not worth the trouble. The knowledge that she would be looking over her shoulder for the foreseeable future should have dampened Fiona's spirits. Instead, she felt strangely exhilarated. For the first time in years, she was making her own choices, determining her own fate. They made camp as the sun began to set, in a secluded glade near a small stream. Preston efficiently built a fire while Fiona arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames, a concession to propriety that made him smile. We can be married in Pineville, he told her as they shared a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and coffee. The preacher there doesn't ask many questions. Fiona looked up in surprise. Married, if you want, Preston added quickly. I don't presume to. Yes, she interrupted, a smile blooming on her face. Yes, I want that. Relief and joy transformed his weather-beaten features. Good, that's. Good. They talked long into the night, planning their future with cautious optimism. Preston spoke of breeding horses, of building a modest but successful ranch. Fiona shared her dreams of perhaps opening a small school for the children of neighboring homesteaders. You'd make a wonderful teacher, Preston told her, his admiration evident. You really think so? I think you can do anything you set your mind to, Fiona Ellis. The use of her maiden name, so deliberate and respectful, brought tears to her eyes. Thank you for seeing me, she whispered. Really seeing me? Always, he promised. The next day's journey brought them into increasingly rugged territory. Pine forests gave way to rocky outcroppings, and the trail narrowed to little more than a deer path in places. Not much farther, Preston assured her as the afternoon waned. Another hour at most, Fiona nodded, too entranced by the wild beauty around them to mind the difficult terrain. This land spoke to something deep within her, something that resonated with the freedom she'd chosen. When they finally crested a ridge to reveal a small cabin nestled in a protected valley below, Fiona gasped in delight. It wasn't grand by any measure, a simple one-room structure with a stone chimney and a small covered porch, but situated amid towering pines with a stream curving around one side. It looked like paradise to her tired eyes. Welcome home, Preston said softly, watching her reaction with nervous anticipation. It's not Silver Creek Ranch, but it's perfect, Fiona interrupted, meaning it with all her heart. Absolutely perfect. The relief and joy that flooded his face made her heart swell. This man valued her opinion, her happiness. Not as a reflection on him or as a possession to display, but because he genuinely cared for her as a person. They rode down to the cabin, where Preston helped her dismount before tending to the horses. Inside, the cabin was basic but clean: a table and chairs, a small cook stove, a bed frame with a straw mattress. A trunk contained household necessities, and shelves held a surprising number of books. You read? Fiona asked, running her fingers along the spines. Preston looked almost embarrassed. When I can. I never had much schooling, but I try to improve myself when time allows. The admission, so humble and honest, endeared him to her even more. Harold would never have acknowledged any deficiency or desire for self-improvement. I could help you, she offered, if you wanted. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I'd like that. They settled into a rhythm over the next few days. Preston worked from dawn until dusk, repairing neglected parts of the cabin, clearing land for an expanded garden, and building a proper stable for the horses. Fiona took charge of the household, making the cabin more comfortable with the limited resources available. At night, they sat before the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking about their hopes and plans. Preston kept to his bedroll on the floor, despite Fiona's insistence that he take the bed. We'll be properly married soon, he told her firmly. I can wait. His respect for her, his refusal to rush or pressure her, only deepened her growing feelings for him. On the 5th day, they rode to Pineville, a frontier town consisting of little more than a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of houses. The preacher, a kindly old man with rheumy eyes, asked no questions about their circumstances when Preston requested a wedding ceremony. Got the license from the county seat last month, Preston explained to Fiona. I was hoping. Well, I was planning for the future. The revelation that he had prepared for this possibility, had hoped for it even before asking her to come with him, touched Fiona deeply. They were married in the simple wooden church with only the preacher's wife and the general store proprietor as witnesses. Fiona wore her plainest dress, adorned only with wildflowers Preston had gathered that morning. I, Preston, take you, Fiona, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he vowed, his voice steady and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. When Fiona repeated the vows, she meant every word with a conviction she'd never felt during her ceremony with Harold. This wasn't a business arrangement or a means of survival. This was a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. You may kiss the bride, the preacher announced with a smile. Preston's kiss was gentle yet passionate, a perfect reflection of the man himself. When they parted, Fiona saw her own joy mirrored in his eyes. Mrs. Forrester, he murmured, the name a caress on his lips. Mr. Forrester, she returned, savoring the rightness of it. They celebrated with a simple meal at the town's only restaurant before purchasing necessary supplies from the general store. The proprietor's wife, a friendly woman named Mrs. Bennet, took a liking to Fiona immediately. We don't get many new faces around here, she explained as she helped Fiona select fabric for curtains. Especially not educated ladies. You'll be a welcome addition to our little community. Thank you, Fiona replied, warmed by the acceptance. I hope to perhaps start a small school eventually. Do many families live nearby, scattered about? Mrs. Bennet said, nodding thoughtfully. Mostly ranchers and farmers with children who get minimal schooling, if any. They'd welcome a proper teacher, I'd wager. The conversation reinforced Fiona's growing sense that she might find not just freedom here, but purpose as well. As they rode back to their cabin that evening, now husband and wife in truth, Fiona felt a contentment she'd never known before. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber, the beauty of it taking her breath away. I never knew the world could look like this, she murmured. Preston glanced at her, understanding in his eyes. That's richness, Fiona, real richness. Not money or possessions, but moments that fill your soul. You were right, she acknowledged. I married for money because I thought it was the only way to survive, but there are different kinds of survival, aren't there? You can keep your body alive while letting your spirit die. And now? He asked softly. Fiona smiled at him, her heart full. Now I feel truly alive for the first time in years. That night, they shared the bed as husband and wife, their joining tender and passionate, an expression of the love growing between them rather than a duty or transaction. In Preston's arms, Fiona discovered the difference between obligation and desire, between endurance and joy. The days stretched into weeks as they built their life together. The cabin gradually transformed into a true home with Fiona's touches, curtains at the windows, wildflowers in improvised vases, neatly organized shelves. Outside, Preston constructed chicken coops and expanded the stable, preparing for the livestock they would eventually acquire. They worked hard from dawn until dusk most days, but the work was satisfying because it was for themselves, for their shared future. In the evenings, they continued their reading sessions, Preston's literacy improving steadily under Fiona's patient guidance. You're a natural teacher, he told her one night as they sat before the fire, a book of poetry open between them. I enjoy it, she admitted. Sharing knowledge feels like creating something valuable from nothing. Preston nodded thoughtfully. You should speak to Reverend Williams next time we're in town. He might help you organize that school you've been dreaming about. The fact that he remembered and supported her ambition That he saw her as more than just his wife or housekeeper reinforced Fiona's certainty that she had made the right choice in leaving Harold. Yet the specter of her former husband lingered. Each time they ventured into town, Fiona scanned faces nervously, half expecting to see Harold or one of his men. Preston noticed but said nothing, simply staying close and watchful. One evening, as October painted the surrounding forest in fiery hues, Preston returned from town with a serious expression. "What is it?" Fiona asked, immediately concerned. "Montgomery was in Silverdale last week," he said without preamble, "asking questions about us." Fear clutched at Fiona's heart. "How do you know?" Frank at the general store heard it from his cousin who works at the hotel there. Preston took her hands in his grip warm and reassuring. "He doesn't know where we are yet, but he's looking." "What do we do?" Preston's gaze was steady. "We live our lives, Fiona. We take precautions, stay alert, but we don't let fear rule us. That would be giving him power over us still." His calm confidence steadied her. "You're right, I won't let him steal our happiness." "That's my girl," Preston said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Despite his reassurances, they took additional precautions. Preston taught Fiona to use the rifle he kept for hunting, insisting she practice until she could hit targets consistently. They established signals and plans for various scenarios: what to do if strangers approached while Preston was away, where to meet if they became separated. "I feel like we're preparing for war," Fiona commented one afternoon after a particularly intense practice session. "Just being cautious," Preston replied, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed his concern. "Montgomery isn't a man to let go easily of what he considers his property." As if to underscore his words, the first snow of winter arrived that night, blanketing their valley in pristine white. The beauty of it momentarily distracted Fiona from her worries. Standing on the porch wrapped in a quilt, she watched the flakes drift down in the lantern light, each one a perfect, unique crystal. Preston joined her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Another kind of richness," he murmured against her ear. She leaned back against his solid warmth. "Show me more," she whispered. "I want to learn all the kinds of richness there are." His lips found her neck, her cheek, finally claiming her mouth in a kiss that banished the winter chill. They made love slowly that night, savoring each touch, each whispered endearment as if imprinting the moment in their memories. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Fiona confessed, "I think I'm falling in love with you, Preston Forrester." He propped himself up on one elbow, gazing down at her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked into that stable looking like a woman who'd forgotten how to breathe freely. And every day since, I've fallen a little deeper." The simple honesty of his declaration brought tears to her eyes. "I never thought I'd find this. After James died and left me with nothing but debts, I convinced myself that practical considerations were all that mattered, that love was a luxury I couldn't afford. And now?" Preston asked softly. Fiona reached up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Now I know it's the only thing that matters. Everything else is just survival." Their peaceful existence continued through the early winter months. The cabin, snug and well-insulated, provided comfortable shelter from the increasingly harsh weather. They established routines, Preston caring for the horses and hunting when conditions permitted, Fiona managing their household and preserving food for the months ahead. In late January, during a rare trip to town between snowstorms, Fiona met with Reverend Williams about starting a small school when spring arrived. The minister was enthusiastic, offering the church building for classes and promising to spread the word among families in the area. "Most folks around here value education," he told her, "but can't spare their children during planting and harvest. Winter and early spring would be your busiest times." "That would work perfectly," Fiona replied, already envisioning lessons and activities. "I could begin in February if there's interest." The minister's wife, overhearing, joined the conversation eagerly. "Oh, there'll be interest all right. I know at least a dozen families within riding distance who'd send their young ones for proper schooling. And some of the adults might come too, for evening lessons." The prospect of contributing meaningfully to their new community filled Fiona with purpose and excitement. On the ride home, she chattered happily about textbooks they might order and subjects she could teach. Preston listened indulgently, his pride in her evident. "You're going to transform this valley," he predicted, "just like you transformed me." "How did I transform you?" Fiona asked curiously. He considered the question seriously. "Before you, I was working toward something my own place, my independence, but I didn't have anyone to share it with, anyone to build it for besides myself." His gaze met hers, warm despite the winter chill. "You gave me purpose beyond myself, Fiona, a reason to build something lasting." The depth of emotion in his words touched her deeply. "And you showed me that richness isn't something that can be bought or sold. It's something you create together, day by day." Their contentment was disrupted a week later when Preston returned from checking their trap lines with a grim expression. "Riders," he announced, stamping snow from his boots. "3 of them following the valley from the south." Fiona's hands stilled in the midst of kneading bread dough. "Harold's men, can't be sure, but they're not local. No one would be up this way in this weather without specific business." Preston moved to the window, scanning the approach to their cabin. "They're still a ways off, maybe an hour given the snow." Fear knotted Fiona's stomach, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What do? We stick to the plan." Preston began gathering essentials: food, ammunition, warm clothing. "You take Starlight and head for the cave we prepared. I'll meet you there once I've dealt with our visitors." "No," Fiona protested immediately. "I won't leave you alone to face them." Preston paused in his preparations, his expression softening as he took in her determined stance. "This isn't your fight, Fiona. It became my fight when I chose you," she countered, wiping her hands on her apron. "We face this together or not at all." For a moment, he looked as though he might argue further, then with a resigned nod, he acknowledged her right to make her own choice. "All right, together." They worked quickly to prepare, moving valuables to hiding places and positioning weapons strategically around the cabin. Preston insisted Fiona wear his heavy sheepskin coat over her dress for additional protection from both the cold and potential violence. "Remember what I taught you," he told her, checking that the rifle he'd given her was loaded properly. "If shooting starts, aim for the center of the body, not the head or limbs, and don't hesitate." Fiona nodded, her mouth dry with fear but her resolve unshaken. "I won't." They took positions with clear views of the approach to the cabin, Preston at the front window, Fiona at the side, and settled in to wait. The minutes stretched interminably, marked only by the ticking of the clock and their measured breaths. Finally, the distant figures resolved into 3 riders moving steadily through the snow toward their home. As they drew closer, Preston's body tensed. "Johnson," he muttered, "Montgomery's new foreman, and 2 of his ranch hands." Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs. "Does that mean Harold knows where we are?" "Looks that way." Preston's voice was grim. "Stay out of sight unless I signal otherwise." The riders approached the cabin directly, making no attempt at stealth. They reined in their horses in the yard, and Johnson called out, "Forrester, we know you're in there. Come out and talk." Preston met Fiona's eyes across the room, a silent communication passing between them. "Keep the rifle ready," he murmured, then moved to the door, opening it just enough to be seen while remaining partially sheltered. Preston addressed the men calmly. "That's close enough, Johnson. State your business." "Mr. Montgomery sends his regards," Johnson replied with false joviality, "and a message for his wife." "She's not his wife anymore," Preston stated firmly. "We're legally married, and she's where she chooses to be." Johnson spat into the snow. "That paper don't mean nothing. She belongs to Mr. Montgomery, paid for fair and square when he settled her debts." From her position, Fiona could see Preston's knuckles whiten where he gripped the doorframe. "A person can't be bought or owned, Johnson. Now take your men and ride out while you still can." One of the other riders, a burly man with a bushy beard, laughed humorlessly. "Listen to him. The stable boy thinks he's giving orders now." "Mr. Montgomery is a reasonable man," Johnson continued, ignoring the interruption. "He's willing to forget this. Indiscretion. If Mrs. Montgomery returns with us now, no harm done." "And if she doesn't?" Preston's voice remained steady, though Fiona could sense the tension coiling within him. Johnson's pretense at civility dropped. Then we take her anyway, and you get buried in this God-forsaken wilderness where nobody'll ever find your bones. The threat hung in the frigid air. Fiona's finger tightened on the rifle's trigger, her breath fogging in the cold air as she waited for Preston's next move. "I think you'd better hear the lady's own wishes," Preston said finally, stepping back from the door. Fiona, understanding his strategy, Fiona moved to his side, keeping the rifle partially concealed by her skirts. "I'm exactly where I want to be, Mr. Johnson," she called clearly. "Please convey to Mr. Montgomery that our marriage was dissolved when I left, and I have no intention of returning." Johnson's face darkened with anger. "It ain't that simple, madam. Mr. Montgomery doesn't let go of what's his." "I was never his," Fiona retorted, her fear giving way to indignation. "I made a mistake in marrying him, but I've corrected it. He has no claim on me now." "Enough talk," the third rider growled, reaching for the gun at his hip. "Let's just take her and be done with it." Preston's rifle appeared in his hands as if by magic, aimed squarely at the man. "Touch that weapon and you're dead before your finger finds the trigger." A tense silence fell over the yard. Fiona stood tall beside Preston, her own rifle now visible and ready. The three men on horseback exchanged uncertain glances, clearly not having expected such determined resistance. Finally, Johnson raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Easy now. Nobody needs to die today." He addressed Fiona directly. "Think about what you're doing, madam. Mr. Montgomery can provide for you better than this. Cowboy, you'll have everything you need, everything you want." "I already have everything I need," Fiona replied steadily. "And the one thing I want that Harold could never give me, love and respect." Johnson's expression hardened. "Mr. Montgomery won't accept that answer." "Then Mr. Montgomery is welcome to come here himself," Preston interjected, "but I'd advise against it. This is our home and we'll defend it." The conviction in his voice must have communicated itself to the three men, for they exchanged glances again, this time with visible uncertainty. "This ain't over," Johnson warned, beginning to back his horse away. "Mr. Montgomery doesn't give up easy." "Neither do we," Preston assured him. The three riders retreated slowly, keeping their eyes on the cabin until they were well beyond rifle range. Only when they had disappeared into the trees did Preston lower his weapon, exhaling a long breath. "They'll be back," he predicted grimly, "with more men next time." Fiona nodded, still watching the spot where the riders had vanished. "What do we do now?" Preston turned to her, his expression softening as he took in her courage and composure. "Now we prepare, and we consider whether this valley is still the right place for our home." "You mean leave?" The idea of abandoning the home they'd built together caused an unexpected pang in Fiona's heart. "But we've worked so hard, my school plans." "I know." Preston drew her into his arms, the rifles awkwardly held aside, "but our safety comes first. There's good land farther north, beyond Montgomery's reach. We could start fresh." Fiona leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his solidity. "Let's not decide yet. They may not return at all." "They'll return," Preston said with certainty. "The question is when and in what numbers." That night, they took turns keeping watch, neither willing to risk being caught unprepared if Johnson and his men decided on a night attack. The hours passed slowly, punctuated by the howl of distant wolves and the occasional crack of freezing branches. During her watch, Fiona gazed out at the moonlit landscape, its beauty unmarred by the threat hanging over them. The valley had become precious to her in ways she hadn't fully realized until now, the particular way sunlight filtered through the pines in the afternoon, the bend in the stream where trout liked to gather, the view of distant mountains from their porch. This was home in a way Silver Creek Ranch had never been, despite its grandeur. Here, she was truly Fiona Forrester, not an ornament or possession but a partner and equal. Here she had discovered what Preston meant by richness, not wealth measured in dollars, but in moments of genuine connection, in shared dreams and mutual respect. "Penny for your thoughts," Preston murmured, coming to sit beside her at the window. "I don't want to leave," Fiona admitted. "This is our place. I won't let Harold take it from us." Preston studied her face in the moonlight. It would be safer to no, she interrupted firmly. We've built something precious here. If we run now, we'll always be running. I want to stand our ground. A slow smile spread across Preston's features. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were this delicate society lady who'd married Montgomery for his money and comfort. I did marry him for his money, Fiona reminded him. Maybe so, but there's nothing delicate about your spirit. He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. You're the strongest person I know, Fiona Forrester. The way he said her name, their name filled her with warmth despite the winter chill. We're stronger together, she told him, and together we'll face whatever comes. The following days passed in tense anticipation, but Johnson and his men did not return. February arrived with a severe blizzard that isolated their cabin for nearly a week, making travel impossible. When the weather finally cleared, Preston made the journey to Pineville for supplies and information. He returned with unexpected news. Montgomery's gone back east, he announced as he shrugged off his snow-covered coat. Called to Boston on urgent business, according to the telegram operator in Silverdale. Relief flooded through Fiona. So we're safe, at least for now, seems that way. Preston's expression remained cautious. But we should still be vigilant. Johnson might take initiative on his own. Despite the lingering threat, they cautiously resumed their plans. With Reverend Williams's help, Fiona began holding classes 3 days a week in the church. To her delight, 12 children and 5 adults enrolled, eager for the education she offered. Preston, meanwhile, acquired 2 pregnant mares from a breeder in a neighboring settlement, the first step in his dream of breeding and training quality horses. Each evening, they shared the day's triumphs and challenges, their partnership deepening through shared purpose and mutual support. As winter gave way to spring, their vigilance gradually relaxed. No further threats materialized, and the demands of their growing enterprises occupied most of their attention. The school flourished, with students making remarkable progress under Fiona's patient guidance. Preston's mares delivered healthy foals, and his reputation as a skilled horseman spread throughout the region. In late April, as wildflowers once again carpeted the valley, Fiona made a discovery that filled her with both joy and trepidation. I'm with child, she told Preston one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his face transformed with wonder and delight. A baby, you're sure? Fiona nodded, her hand resting instinctively on her still flat abdomen. Mrs. Williams confirmed it today. She says I'm about 2 months along. Preston's whoop of joy echoed across the valley as he lifted her from her chair and spun her in a careful circle. A child, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Our child. His unrestrained happiness banished Fiona's lingering concerns. Together, they would face whatever came, including parenthood. That night, as they lay in bed making plans for the baby's arrival in late November, Fiona felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. What is it? Preston asked, noticing her silent tears. I was just thinking about how differently my life might have turned out, she explained. If I hadn't married Harold for his money, I might never have met you, never found this kind of happiness. Preston gathered her close. Sometimes the wrong turns lead us to the right destinations, he mused. I'm just grateful every day that you found the courage to leave with me. The best decision I ever made, Fiona assured him. The summer passed in a blur of activity. Fiona's pregnancy progressed normally, her gradually swelling abdomen a source of fascination to her young students. Preston expanded their cabin, adding a second room that would serve as both nursery and classroom for the winter months when traveling to the church would be difficult. In August, an unexpected letter arrived from Mrs. Hawkins, forwarded through the general store in Pineville. Harold is returning from Boston in September, Fiona read aloud, her voice tight with anxiety. He's been speaking of finding me, of making an example of us. Preston's expression darkened. After all this time, it's been nearly a year. Apparently his business troubles in Boston have been resolved and his attention has returned to personal matters. Fiona looked up from the letter, fear evident in her eyes. What do we do? Preston paced the length of the cabin, his mind working furiously. We have options. We can leave, head farther west or north, or we can stay and prepare to defend what's ours. Fiona's hand moved protectively to her rounded belly. With the baby coming, perhaps leaving would be wiser. Perhaps, Preston agreed, though reluctance colored his tone. But this is our home, Fiona. Everything we've built together is here. Your school, my horses, our future. The dilemma weighed heavily on them both. That night as they lay sleepless in bed, Fiona finally said, "I think we should stay." Preston propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face in the moonlight. "Are you sure?" "With the baby." "Because of the baby," Fiona corrected gently. "I want our child to grow up in a home built with love, not fear. If we run now, we'll always be running." Preston's expression softened with pride and love. "You're an extraordinary woman, Fiona Forrester." "We're an extraordinary team," she countered, taking his hand and placing it on her belly where their child grew. "And we'll face Harold together as a family." Their decision made, they began preparations. Preston enlisted the help of trusted neighbors, men who had come to respect both him and Fiona through their contributions to the community. Extra ammunition was acquired, escape routes planned, and watches established. September arrived with no sign of Harold or his men. The valley blazed with autumn colors, the aspens turning golden against the evergreen backdrop of pine and spruce. Fiona's belly grew rounder as their child continued to develop, strong and healthy according to Mrs. Williams's experienced assessment. "Could be twins," the minister's wife suggested during one examination. "You're carrying rather large for 6 months." The possibility both thrilled and terrified the expectant parents. 2 babies would mean double the joy and double the vulnerability if trouble arrived before their birth. On a crisp October morning, as Fiona taught her students in the church, and Preston worked with a spirited colt in the paddock behind their cabin, riders appeared on the ridge overlooking their valley. The nearest neighbor, a farmer named Erickson who had volunteered to keep watch that day, fired the warning shot they had arranged as a signal. Preston immediately secured the horses and ran for the cabin to retrieve his rifle. By the time the riders, 6 of them, including Harold Montgomery himself, reached the valley floor, they found not an isolated homestead ripe for intimidation, but a community prepared to defend its own. 12 men, farmers and ranchers from the surrounding area, had responded to the warning shot. They formed a line before the cabin, rifles ready but not yet aimed. Behind them, in the cabin's doorway, stood Fiona, one hand supporting her rounded belly, the other holding her own rifle with calm determination. Harold reined in his horse, surprise evident on his face at the unexpected reception. He had aged in the year since Fiona had last seen him, his hair grayer, lines deeper around his mouth and eyes. "This is a private matter," he announced to the assembled men. "Between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," Preston corrected, stepping forward. "And it ceased being private when you sent men to threaten us in our home." Harold's gaze moved from Preston to Fiona, narrowing when he took in her obvious pregnancy. "So that's how it is," he said coldly. "You left me for this nobody, and now you're breeding his brats." Fiona stepped forward, her head held high. "I left you because you saw me as property, Harold. Because you never loved me, you only wanted to own me." "Love," Harold scoffed. "You married me for my money, Fiona. Let's not pretend there was ever anything more between us." "You're right," she acknowledged, surprising him. "I did marry you for money because I was afraid and desperate. It was a mistake I'll always regret, not because it brought me hardship, but because it compromised my integrity." Her candor seemed to momentarily disarm him. Harold studied her face, then looked around at the determined men standing between him and his objective. "These people don't know you," he said finally. "They don't know you're a fortune hunter who abandoned her lawful husband. They don't know what you're really capable of." "They know exactly who I am," Fiona countered, "because I've stopped pretending to be someone else. I've stopped measuring my worth by the security I can obtain from others." Preston moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "We've built a life here, Montgomery. A real life based on mutual respect and genuine affection, something you wouldn't understand." Harold's face darkened with anger. "You stole what was mine, boy, and I came to take it back." "She was never yours to begin with," Preston replied evenly. "A marriage certificate doesn't convey ownership, especially when it's based on coercion and desperation." The standoff continued, tension thickening the air between the two groups. Finally, Reverend Williams stepped forward, his Bible in hand. "Mr. Montgomery," he addressed Harold directly. "I performed the marriage ceremony for Preston and Fiona Forrester nearly a year ago. They are lawfully wed in the eyes of God and this community. Whatever claim you believe you had on this woman has been dissolved by time and circumstance." "A frontier wedding with no legal standing," Harold dismissed. Your lawyers will find that the marriage was recorded properly with the territorial authorities," the minister interrupted. "And that your former wife signed documents officially terminating your marriage on grounds of abandonment." This was news to Fiona, who shot the minister a questioning look. "Preston insisted," Reverend Williams explained with a small smile. "Said he wanted everything legal and proper to protect you and any children that might come." The revelation of Preston's foresight and care brought tears to Fiona's eyes. Even in the midst of their escape, he had been thinking of her security, her future. Harold seemed to deflate slightly, the legal avenue closed to him, but his expression remained obstinate. "She still owes me. The debts I paid, the clothes, the jewelry, I left it all," Fiona reminded him. "Everything you gave me stayed at Silver Creek Ranch. I took nothing that wasn't mine before our marriage." "Not good enough," Harold snapped. "You embarrassed me, made me a laughingstock. There's a price for that." One of Harold's men shifted nervously in his saddle. "Mr. Montgomery, there's a lot of guns pointed our way." "Maybe we should reconsider." "Shut up," Harold snarled, his composure cracking. His hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. Preston's rifle came up smoothly, aimed at Harold's chest. "Don't," he warned quietly. For a long, terrible moment, Fiona thought Harold might draw anyway, might force a confrontation that could only end in bloodshed. Then, with a visible effort, he moved his hand away from his weapon. "This isn't over," he promised, his eyes boring into Fiona with naked hatred. "Yes, it is," Preston contradicted him. "You're going to ride out of this valley and you're never coming back, because if you do, if you ever threaten my family again, I won't hesitate to defend what's mine." The irony of the possessive statement wasn't lost on Fiona, but she understood the difference. Preston didn't claim her as property but as someone to protect and cherish, not to control. Harold looked around once more at the determined faces surrounding him, calculation evident in his expression. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine, she's not worth the trouble anyway." The dismissal, meant to wound, bounced harmlessly off Fiona's newfound confidence. "Goodbye, Harold," she said simply. Without another word, Montgomery wheeled his horse around and signaled his men to follow. They rode away at a measured pace, dignity intact but purpose defeated. Only when they had disappeared beyond the ridge did the tension break. The neighbors clapped Preston on the back, congratulating him on the peaceful resolution. Fiona accepted hugs from the women who had arrived during the confrontation, their concern evident in the tight embraces. "Is it really over?" she asked Preston when they were finally alone that evening. He considered the question seriously. "I think so. Montgomery is many things, but he's not stupid. He knows when he's beaten." "And the legal papers, were they real?" Preston nodded. "Reverend Williams helped me arrange it all properly. As far as the law is concerned, you haven't been Mrs. Montgomery for quite some time." Relief washed over Fiona, along with a surge of gratitude for this man who thought of everything, who protected without controlling, who loved without possessing. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning into his embrace, "for thinking of everything. For seeing me as a person worth protecting, not a possession worth owning." Preston's arms tightened around her. "You never need to thank me for that, Fiona. It's the foundation of everything between us." 6 weeks later, as the first snows of winter began to dust their valley, Fiona gave birth to twins, a boy with Preston's blue eyes and a girl with Fiona's copper hair. They named them James and Eleanor, honoring Fiona's first husband and Preston's mother. As she nursed her son while Preston cradled their daughter beside the fireplace, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. "I was thinking," Preston said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about what you said that day we first rode together. About marrying for money." "What about it?" Fiona asked, adjusting James at her breast. I realize now I was a bit harsh in my judgment. You did what you had to do to survive, and there's no shame in that." He gazed down at Aliner's sleeping face with undisguised adoration. "But I'm glad you gave me the chance to teach you about different kinds of richness." Fiona smiled, her heart so full it seemed impossible that it could contain such love without bursting. "And what have you learned from me, Preston Forrester?" He considered the question seriously. "That true wealth isn't in having, but in sharing. That the richest man in the world is the one who has someone to build dreams with." His eyes met hers across the space between them, blue and steady and full of love. "That home isn't a place but a feeling, and that feeling is you, Fiona. You and these little ones." Tears of happiness blurred Fiona's vision. "We are rich, aren't we? Richer than Harold Montgomery could ever understand." "The richest people in the territory," Preston agreed with a contented smile. "Maybe in the whole world." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their valley in pristine white. Inside, warmed by the fire and by the love that bound them together, the Forrester family began their first winter as a family of 4 wealthy beyond measure in all the ways that truly mattered.